Test du floor. Test 1, 2, test floor. Ok.
Ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, I'm supposed to speak louder, so excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to pull rank, and I'm as the sort of chair of this meeting, and I would ask you all to take a seat, please. I'm sure people will start coming in and slowly walking in and taking their seats. But we're going to now be closing the door and starting our event because we have to keep to the time. Let me sit down just. We have to keep the time because we really have a very, very busy schedule today, and we also must leave at 6 o'clock sharp. Our colleagues from the UN applaud because of not only the regulations of leaving, but I understand there's also an event after our own, which is not linked to our own event. So on this note, I would like to begin by welcoming our speakers, welcoming our guests, speakers, welcoming our member states who are here, and welcoming not only those that are in the room, but I know that we have around 60 people connected, and this is for us very, very much a pleasure to have you all here today. So at this point, I would like to put a little bit of context, if you allow me, at this event. And as you see, it's entitled Press for the Planet. And I'd like to say that 30 years after the first World Press Freedom Day celebration in 1994 and the adoption of the historic Santiago Declaration, Chile and UNESCO hosted the very successful global commemoration of World Press Freedom Day 2024 just a couple of days ago in Santiago. In this context, I would like to welcome you to Geneva's commemoration of World Press Freedom Day 2024, dedicated to the fight against climate disinformation and denial, as well as the protection of journalists and scientists. Reporting on environmental issues requires collaboration between journalists and scientific researchers, and ensuring the freedom of expression and the freedom of scientific inquiry is imperative to ensure access to reliable reporting on environmental issues. Independent journalists and scientists are crucial in helping our society to separate facts from fiction and to take informed decisions. In this regard, I would like to thank all of our partners, the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, the United Nations Environment Programme, the Permanent Mission of Austria to Geneva, the Permanent Mission of Chile to Geneva, and the Geneva Press Club for supporting us in organizing this commemoration. And of course, our host, the United Nations in Geneva. I would like, therefore, to invite our first speaker, who needs absolutely no introduction, the Director General of the United Nations Office at Geneva, Mrs. Tatiana Valovaya, to deliver the first opening remarks. Director General, please.
Thank you very much, and welcome all to the Palais des Nations. It's my great pleasure, great honor to welcome you. And, of course, it's my great honor to read out the message of the United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres. The world is going through an unprecedented environmental emergency, which poses an existential threat to these and future generations. People need to know about this, and journalists and media workers have a key role in informing and educating them. Local, national, and global media outlets can highlight stories about the climate crisis, biodiversity loss, and environmental injustice. Through their work, people come to understand the plight of our planet and are mobilized and empowered to take action for change. Media workers also document environmental degradation and they provide evidence of environmental vandalism that helps to hold those responsible to account. It is no surprise that some powerful people, companies, and institutions will stop at nothing to prevent environmental journalists from doing their jobs. Media freedom is under siege, and environmental journalism is an increasingly dangerous profession. Dozens of journalists covering illegal mining, logging, poaching, and other environmental issues have been killed in recent decades. In the vast majority of cases, no one has been held to account. UNESCO reports that in the past 15 years, there have been some 750 attacks on journalists and news outlets reporting on environmental issues, and the frequency of such attacks is rising. Legal processes are also misused to censor, silence, detain, and harass environmental reporters, while a new era of climate disinformation focuses on undermining proven solutions, including renewable energy. But environmental journalists are not the only ones at risk. Around the world, media workers are risking their lives trying to bring us news on everything from war to democracy. I am shocked and appalled by the high number of journalists killed in Israeli military operations in Gaza. The United Nations recognizes the invaluable work of journalists and media professionals to ensure that the public is informed and engaged. Without facts, we cannot fight mis- and disinformation. Without accountability, we will not have strong policies in place. Without press freedom, we won't have any freedom. A free press is not a choice, but a necessity. Our World Press Freedom Day is very important, and so I call on governments, the private sector, and civil society to join us in reaffirming our commitment to safeguarding press freedom and the rights of journalists and media professionals around the world. This was the end of the message of the United Nations Secretary General. Allow me to add just a few words on my own. First of all, I would like to thank everybody for organizing this event and the Permanent Mission of Austria and Permanent Mission of Chile for their general support. For me, it's really a great honor to welcome you here. Some of you may know that I started my professional career exactly as a journalist, and I worked as a journalist practically for 5 years, a long time. And now, when I was preparing for this event, I just realized that in my previous career, I did some environmental journalism. Exactly at that time, an issue of what happens to big internal seas, internal lakes in the Eurasian region, Caspian, Aral, Azov, was being raised. And it was a very important issue. And at that time, as a young journalist with economic background, I was asked to interview professionals who knew a lot about what taking place. But before that, nobody was interested to make their views public. And that was really very important for me as a young person to understand that there are lots of very knowledgeable, very professional people who never had access to public media, because at that time social media, of course, did not exist, but even to official media, because they were doing their research, they were doing their academic research, they had lots of information, they were excellent in what they're doing, but of course they were not great speakers, and it was very difficult to ask them to provide the information and then to reprocess this information to make it popular. And I was really happy that I managed to prepare quite a number of very significant interviews with them, speaking exactly about the future of our nature, the future of this part of the world. I never thought about it as environmental journalism, but now I understand it was. But at that time, and it was not risky, it was not dangerous, it was something the public, the society, the governmental institutions wanted. It's not the case in many parts of the world these days. That's why it's really very, very important to support the press freedom, be it environmental journalist or journalist who is covering military conflicts or human rights issues all around the world. And I really thank you all for being here today and really allowing us to speak about the importance of the freedom of the press. Thank you.
Director General, thank you very, very much for your words, and I take this opportunity to introduce and invite Ambassador Desiree Schweitzer, Permanent Representative of Austria to the UN in Geneva, to take the floor.
Thank you very much, Annalisa. Good afternoon, dear colleagues, and welcome. I'm very happy that you're all here to commemorate the World Press Freedom Day together. Media freedom and the safety of journalists are key priorities for Austria, not only here in Geneva, but globally. For example, you know that, some of you know that we are leading the resolution on safety of journalists in the Human Rights Council, and that we chair the group of friends for the safety of journalists here in Geneva. And I'm very happy to see some colleagues and members of this group here today. Free media is in everyone's interest. Free and independent scientific reporting on the state of the environment, climate change and biodiversity provides us with the information and understanding we need to respond adequately to the environmental crisis we face globally. Journalists, media workers and scientists working on environmental issues are increasingly subject to threats and attacks online and offline. And like in many situations, women are often disproportionately affected and face intersecting risks. Austria has recently pledged to provide training for journalists in critical situations to enhance their safety. But of course, we must not put the onus on journalists. We have to create an enabling environment for freedom of expression. In today's two panels on combating climate disinformation and protecting environmental journalists and scientists, we will hear from experts in the field who are directly affected by our decisions. Their experience and recommendations can help us, as states, understand how we can better protect our rights and safety, and in turn ensure the well-being of our planet and its inhabitants. The UN Plan of Action on the Safety of Journalists and the issue of impunity, the Windhoek +30 Declaration adopted on World Press Freedom Day 3 years ago, and this year's political declaration adopted in Santiago de Chile, all of which Austria is proud to have supported, are valuable instruments, and we must translate them into action. And with that, I wish us all interesting discussions, and I hope that we will all take important messages from this event. Over to you again. Thank you very much, Annalisa.
Thank you, Ambassador. And at this point, I would also like to request that Ambassador Claudia Fuentes, Permanent Representative of Chile to the UN in Geneva, take the floor. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's working now, you know, problems with technology. Okay, Excellencies, dear friends, colleagues, last week, as it was already mentioned, Chile proudly hosted the World Press Freedom Day in Santiago. This international conference highlighted the essential role of free press in addressing global challenges and advancing democracy. The discussions and outcomes from these events had further energized our commitment to support the media and safeguard their fundamental right to work freely and fearlessly. I am grateful to the Ambassador of Austria and UNESCO for having taken the initiative to organize this event today here in Geneva that echoes and enhances what happened in Santiago just a few days ago. The significant gathering in Chile underscored the essential role of the press in shining a light on environmental issues, combating disinformation, and safeguarding democracy. The discussion from this event reaffirmed our belief that a well-informed public is the bedrock of a healthy democracy and of an ambitious climate and environmental action. The conference took place to commemorate the 30th anniversary of the Santiago Declaration, which emphasized the fundamental role of media freedom in democratic development. The challenges we face today, be they environmental degradation, threats to journalists, or the erosion of democratic standards, require a renewed commitment to multilateralism, transparency, and inclusivity. At the opening of the conference last Thursday, the President of Chile, Gabriel Boric, alerted on the daunting risk faced by environmental defenders worldwide. Regrettably, since 2021, there have been over 200 reported murders of environmental activists, which more than 3/4 of them are actually occurring in my region, in Latin America. This stark reality shows the dangerous intersection of environmental advocacy and freedom of expression. Also, President Boric underscored the right and duty of the press to question, critique, and demand accountability from those in power, stating that, and I'm quoting him, the press must unsettle the political power. This principle is at the heart of our commitment to democracy and environmental action. Today we stand at a pivotal moment as our global community faces profound environmental, democratic, and information challenges that demand our urgent and collective action. In Chile, we have recognized the intricate connections between human rights and environmental integrity. This understanding is embodied in the Escazú Agreement, which Chile actively promoted and officially ratified under the leadership of President Boric only 2 years ago. This landmark treaty is not just a regional commitment, but a global call to ensure public access to environmental information, to facilitate public participation in environmental decision-making, and to promote environmental defenders across Latin America and the Caribbean. This instrument also underscores the necessity of transparency and accountability, principles that are essential not only for environmental governance, but also for the robustness of our democracies. Journalists and media workers play a critical role in this context. They amplify the voices of the marginalized, hold power to account, and shed light on environmental abuses and corruption. Yet, as I mentioned before, they face unprecedented risk. According to UNESCO, 1,668 journalists have been killed since 1993 in areas which actually without armed conflict, which highlights the dangerous conditions in which journalists operate. Chile is committed to protecting these brave individuals. In our national legislation, we are advancing a pioneer bill that enhances safeguards for journalists and communication workers, integrating a gender perspective to address the specific vulnerabilities faced by women in the media. Moreover, we are witnessing a troubling rise in disinformation, which undermines trust in our media and weakens the fabric of our societies. In response, we should advocate for a journalism that is diligent, ethical, and capable of empowering citizens to distinguish between falsehood and truth. The commitment to media integrity is critical for preserving the health of our democracies and for confronting the environmental crises that threaten our collective future. The proliferation of disinformation poses a grave threat to stability for our societies and the health of our planet. In this digital age, the role of a free press extends beyond reporting. It involves educating the public to discern truth from fake news. This educational role is pivotal in fostering a society that is not only well-informed, but also engaged and resilient in the face of the triple planetary crisis humanity is confronted to. On behalf of Chile, let me reiterate, therefore, the pledge to strengthen our support for the media, to champion the rights of environmental defenders, and to foster a global community that values and protects freedom of expression as a cornerstone of democracy. Together, let us champion a world where freedom of expression thrives as a pillar of democracy and a guardian of our global environment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for this very detailed itemized idea of all the issues that are here today, and I'm sure it echoes so many of the points that we will hear today, and so I'm very grateful to that. I take this opportunity now to introduce the video message from Mr. Tawfik Yelassi, who is the Assistant Director General for Communication and Information at UNESCO. Unfortunately, he could not be here with us today, so we have a video message from him, and I thank him very much for that. So if the technical magic can occur.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, dear colleagues, good afternoon to all of you, and welcome to this important event marking the International World Press Freedom Day 2024. My name is Tawfik Yelassi, and I am Assistant Director General at UNESCO in charge of communication and information. I would like to express my gratitude to the UN colleagues in Geneva and the permanent delegations there involved in organizing this discussion, as well as to all those of you present with us today. Last week, Chile and UNESCO commemorated the World Press Freedom Day in Santiago, marking 30 years since the first celebration of this day, which took place back in 1994. This year's commemoration focused on the essential link between press freedom and environmental action, underscoring the crucial role of journalists and scientists in providing accurate and timely information about the environment. Access to this kind of information enables constructive political discourse, promotes transparency, and ensures accountability for governments and corporations. However, data published last week by UNESCO reveals concerning trends. 70% of journalists face attacks, threats, or pressure when covering environmental issues, with nearly half of them engaging in self-censorship. Moreover, the proliferation of mis- and disinformation in the digital sphere undermines the scientific consensus on climate change. Last week's discussion emphasized the need for states and stakeholders to foster an environment that is conducive to freedom of expression and holds accountable those who target journalists and scientists. Digital platforms must prioritize verified information, and journalists require support for transnational initiatives to combat disinformation campaigns. UNESCO remains committed to addressing these challenges, building on the excellent ongoing cooperation with the Office of the High Commissioner on Human Rights and other UN agencies in Geneva to implement the UN Plan of Action on the Safety of Journalists. The preservation of a free, independent, and pluralistic press, along with the freedom of scientific inquiry, is increasingly vital to safeguarding human lives and the planet. Without freedom of expression, we jeopardize the very conditions necessary for our collective existence. Together, let's continue striving for a world where the free flow of information and the pursuit of truth remain pillars for our society. Thank you for your attention.
Well, I also have to conclude by saying thank you to our Assistant Director General for his message. And to conclude the introductory remarks, I would like to introduce, last but definitely not least, our colleague from OHCHR, Mr. Abdul Thioye, who's Chief of the Rule of Law, Equality and Non-Discrimination Branch.
Thank you, Ana Luisa. Excellencies, colleagues, friends, thank you for inviting OHCHR to deliver some remarks at the opening of this important event. Since the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, science and human rights have been intertwined. Article 27 of the Declaration states, quote, "Everyone has the right to share in scientific advancement and its benefits," end of quote. Today, this right is more crucial than ever. The UN Secretary General's recent declaration signals the onset of a new era of environmental crisis with alarming projection of a 3-degree Celsius temperature, rise and pervasive pollution by centuries end. The 2022 recognition by the General Assembly of the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment for all constituted an important milestone for the environmental justice movement. It affirmed that environmental crises are, in fact, human rights crises. Central to mitigating environmental harm and ensuring a healthy environment is the pursuit of safe research and access to reliable information. Government must heed the repeated calls from the High Commissioner for Human Rights to protect scientists who uncover the detrimental impact of human activities on our planet. Protection is the primary responsibility of government. It includes developing policies to combat climate disinformation while upholding freedom of expression through diverse information access, open spaces for participation and debate, as well as education and literacy programs. Corporations also bear responsibility. They should expand transparency around their policies and responses to disinformation and broaden access to evidence-based environmental data for research purposes. Journalists play a pivotal role in advocating for informed policy decisions amidst misinformation and propaganda. Yet, they face mounting hostility, especially in remote areas with scant police protection and weak rule of law. Furthermore, the scarcity of environmental reporting positions in mainstream media outlets has forced many journalists into freelance roles, exposing them to various forms of attack, including hate campaigns, online harassment, which is abusing abusing private information in the case of women journalists. It includes also strategic lawsuits against public participation. To safeguard environmental journalists and scientists, we must see stronger commitments from governments and employers alike. I am confident that the deliberation today will yield tangible steps towards strengthening the protection of environmental journalists and scientists. I thank you.
Very much, Abdul. And with this, we have closed our introductory remarks to today's event. And it is with great pleasure that I call to the podium the presidents of the UNESCO General Conference and of the Human Rights Council. We have a special presentation for all regarding of the joint statement of the presidents of the UN General Assembly, the UNESCO General Conference, the president of the UN Economic and Social Council, and of the UN Human Rights Council, which we have the pleasure of hosting today. Yes. since the presidents have joined me on the podium, I would like to first and foremost introduce them because it is really a great honor to have them here with us. So if you allow me, I would like to highlight that I have next to me Ambassador Simona Mirela Viculescu, and she has been holding her current position as permanent delegate of Romania to UNESCO since 2021. Ambassador Miculescu is currently serving as the president of the 42nd session of the UNESCO General Conference 23-25. She is also the first Romanian ever to lead a governing body of this organization. Next to me also very well known to the International Geneva, but I cannot help myself to also have the pleasure of introducing His Excellency Ambassador Omar Zniber, President of the 18th cycle of the Human Rights Council, and he has been the permanent representative of Morocco to the United Nations and other international organizations in Geneva since April 2018. On 10th of January of this year, Ambassador Zniber was elected President of the Human Rights Council for 2024. Now, if I may, very quickly, introduce this very important part of the panel. And I think it's very important that I highlight to you that since 2022, the presidents of the relevant UN governing bodies, the ones I mentioned before, and I believe it's, no, there is no, I had hoped for a slide, but that's okay, decided to join efforts and make joint calls for the protection and promotion of freedom of expression on the occasion of World Press Freedom Day, which specifically is the 3rd of May. Proclaimed by the UNGA in 1993, and with a global celebration spearheaded by UNESCO, over the last 3 decades, this day has become a pivotal moment when we come together and stress the importance of journalism and free press to strengthen democracy and human rights, as has been mentioned before by our illustrious guests and partners. Every year, there is a specific focus, and this year it has been making a call to counter environmental disinformation and protect the safety of environmental journalists as well as scientists and other stakeholders working on these issues. The joint statement is available online, and with modern technology, you will see a QR code where you can download the whole statement. Now, I am going to change a little bit, and I'm going to be asking questions. So both of my guests will forgive me for this. So I will address one question to each president, and then I will conclude with one question to both. Okay? As president of the UNESCO General Conference, you continued the tradition of your predecessor to invite presidents from other UN relevant bodies to co-develop a declaration on the occasion of World Press Freedom Day. And you were just back from Santiago, and I can testify, Santiago, Geneva. So thank you again. Where the joint statement was unveiled, what are the most important takeaways from the global commemoration? And what impact does it have to bring together the UN governing bodies and speak with one voice? Please. Ambassador. Yes.
Thank you very much for this insightful question. Hello, everybody, Your Excellencies, colleagues. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here, and no effort is huge when you are invited to such meaningful events. So I'm very grateful that I'm here. And I'm very, very happy to say that I was one of the lucky ones who participated in Santiago. And I wanted to tell you, Ambassador Fuentes, that it was a magnificent celebration. My congratulations and my gratitude. Together with UNESCO, you really organized a very memorable celebration of the World Press Freedom Day. And I have to say that our colleagues from the Communication and Information Division were very, very pleased with the global press coverage of these celebrations. So it was a major success. The messages were heard. So in that very meaningful context, I was really pleased to unveil together with your colleague from New York, Ambassador Paula Narvaez, who is also the permanent representative of Chile to the United Nations, but also president of ECOSOC. She was in presencia there. We unveiled together the joint statement dedicated to the key issue of freedom of expression and journalism in the face of the climate crisis. But we were also joined by the other two co-signatories of the statement, this time on video, Ambassador Omar Sniber, the President of the Human Rights Council, and also Ambassador Denis Francis, the President of the General Assembly. And of course, I won't miss this opportunity to thank you once again for helping me continue this tradition and to support this project, and also to have me here as a guest. I'm very, very happy and honored. I'm also honored because I'm, every diplomat, career or not, I'm a career diplomat, 33 years in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Romania. You have a certain feeling coming in the House of Human Rights, and I'm pretty excited, I have to say, and touched. So I think that you can see it, hear it on my voice. But I'm very happy to be here in order to share with you our common call for a free, independent and pluralistic media, and for access to accurate and timely information. And actually, these are key factors for informed decision-making, you know that, Mr. President, to address the climate crisis. And we have to deploy all efforts to make them reality around the world. So let me just give you a few highlights from my perspective as participant in Santiago. Our event in Santiago, our specific event on the joint statement, was pretty well received. Actually, the moderator, the general director of the Deutsche Welle Akademie, Oskar von Niemann, he said that it was the first time in his long career of journalism that he had 4 presidents in one event. It was a large audience despite the pretty late hour of the session, so sorry, I seem like bragging about it, but it was very important for us to have an audience and to be able to convey our messages to as many persons as we could. I think that our urgent call for the protection and promotion of freedom of expression marked a pivotal moment in our collective commitment to upholding fundamental rights. And actually, I think that the most important thing is that we have demonstrated for the 3rd year in a row that leaders of the UN governing bodies can speak with one voice on a critical issue and actually walk the talk. Because I'm sure that this expression is used also in Geneva, right? I must say that the celebration of the World Press Freedom Day has evolved into an essential platform for reaffirming the indispensable role of journalism and a free press in fostering sustainable development. And now, let me just quickly turn to a few lessons learned over the last editions. So I could say that the joint statement by the heads of the governing bodies in Paris, Geneva, and New York have enabled stronger coordination within the relevant UN HQs and the UN system as a whole on freedom of expression and safety of journalists, 2 very important topics, particularly within the implementation of the UN Plan of Action for the safety of journalists and the issue of impunity. And one more thing that I think was very important was that there have been closer interactions between the delegations in the 3 UN hotspots. We constantly speak about that in UNESCO, that we should coordinate more and better with our colleagues in the other 2 UN hotspots. And I think that this coordination was actually reflected also in the relevant resolutions approved by the respective bodies. And one last thing, as we are heading towards key global events such as the Summit for the Future, I really think that the topic of this year's celebration of the World Press Freedom Day, which was a press for the planet, journalism in the face of environmental crisis, has a particular significance because, as mentioned by several speakers before us, the spread of environmental disinformation has, it actually constitutes a grave threat to our planet, to its inhabitants, and it is underscoring the urgent need for concerted action in order to inspire meaningful change. Of course, I cannot finish my response without thanking you very much for this chance of addressing this event, and I do it on behalf of 194 member states of UNESCO, so thank you, President. I thank you, dear colleague from the Geneva Liaison Office of UNESCO, and of course to the permanent missions of Austria and Chile for hosting this event. I really think it is a very meaningful one, and I cannot wait to answer the next question.
Thank you very much. Now I will pass the spot to Ambassador Zniber. And my question to you is as follows. As President of the Human Rights Council, what role do you see for the Human Rights Council's universal periodic review and special procedures as mechanisms to enhance the interlinking rights to freedom of expression and access of information in relation to environmental crisis and tackling climate change?
Merci beaucoup, chère Madame Thompson-Flores, d'abord pour votre invitation à cet événement très important pour cet après-midi, important par la substance qu'il touche dans nos débats, comme on l'a vu déjà à travers le premier panel qui s'est présenté devant nous cet après-midi. Je voudrais aussi remercier Madame la Présidente du Conseil général de l'UNESCO d'être parmi nous après ce long trajet, de venir faire ce stop à Genève, aussi pour contribuer à nos débats de cet après-midi, selon la perspective de l'UNESCO qui est fondamentale. Je m'enorgueillis du fait d'avoir participé, même à distance, à cette conférence à Santiago, avec ce triple message des trois institutions, des trois organes que vous avez cités, relevant l'importance, je l'espère, que les Nations Unies, plus globalement, accorderont à ce sujet fondamental de la liberté de la presse, de l'information, non seulement avec le sujet de changement climatique qui nous intéresse cet après-midi, mais plus globalement avec les sujets multilatéraux. Nous traversons peut-être des moments difficiles pour le multilatéralisme, et si on a besoin de s'appuyer sur des acteurs majeurs qui peuvent aider le multilatéralisme à mieux être compris, à mieux être perçu au niveau global, c'est bien aussi la presse et les médias. Je voudrais vous saluer également votre présence, Madame la Directrice Générale, cet après-midi avec nous, et vous remercier aussi de nous offrir l'occasion de ce débat de cet après-midi. Je vais essayer de répondre très rapidement, je sais que le temps imparti est assez court, mais je commencerai par dire ce qui suit. Le Conseil des droits de l'homme est l'organe des Nations Unies le plus suivi par les médias. C'est tout simplement comme ça, absolument. Selon toutes les données que nous percevons, que nous avons, les débats du Conseil sont suivis non seulement par les médias et plus largement par l'opinion publique. Je vais vous donner un seul chiffre pour ne pas trop vous embarrasser. Certaines des réunions du Conseil sont suivies en ligne, à distance, par 2 millions de personnes en même temps. Cela veut dire quand même qu'il y a de l'intérêt. D'où l'importance des médias. C'est fondamental. Maintenant, vous me posez une question très précise et je pense que vous avez choisi dans votre question les meilleurs outils dont dispose le Conseil pour travailler dans ce sens, faire le lien entre le rôle des médias sur la prise de conscience, beaucoup plus que la prise de conscience, sur l'avertissement, comme cela a été dit cet après-midi, sur la détérioration de l'environnement et le changement climatique. Et ce rôle ne peut être assuré que si les médias disposent de la liberté fondamentale et essentielle. Alors, que peut faire l'UPR et les procédures spéciales pour, j'allais dire, répondre à cette nécessité? L'UPR, l'examen périodique universel, est très bien approprié. Pourquoi? Parce qu'il y a d'abord un travail en amont. Nous en sommes au 4e cycle. Les États sont appelés, invités à préparer des rapports. Et dans la préparation des rapports, vient le rôle de la société civile, vient le rôle des ONG, vient le rôle aussi, si vous voulez, des médias, pour dire voilà ce que le pays en tant que tel prépare comme réponse pour aller devant le Conseil à Genève. Et c'est là peut-être que la question des changements climatiques qui devient majeure doit être abordée aussi à ce niveau-là, comme on le sait. Deuxièmement, qu'est-ce qu'on constate, puisqu'il n'y a pas que la préparation et la présentation et le dialogue qui se fait durant le rapport, qu'est-ce qu'on constate? Les recommandations, les observations, les critiques, entre guillemets, qui se font dans le cadre de ce débat, qui est bien accepté, il faut le souligner, au sein du Conseil, sont de plus en plus focalisées sur les questions des changements climatiques. Puisqu'il y a aussi l'information qui circule, et cela a été observé au sein de notre Conseil, quels ont été les premiers États à, en quelque sorte, faire l'alarme, comme cela a été dit tout à l'heure par M. Thio, ce sont les petits États insulaires qui sont les plus menacés par les changements climatiques, comme on le sait. Et donc l'information est bien parvenue. Donc le rôle des médias dans ce sens-là a été important. Donc dans le cadre de l'UPR, nous avons ce processus et je crois qu'il n'y a plus aujourd'hui, j'allais dire, lieu de tergiverser sur l'impact gravissime des changements climatiques dans le monde grâce à l'information qui remonte. Nous nous rappelons tous ce qu'on appelait le scepticisme, le pessimisme concernant les données scientifiques relatives au changement climatique. Ce sont des sujets très complexes. Moi-même, comme vous tous, je l'imagine, j'ai été confronté à la lecture d'un certain nombre de rapports. Quand le GIEC sort ces rapports, c'est 5000 pages. 5000 pages écrites dans un langage scientifique. Peu de diplomates, j'ose le dire ainsi, ont la capacité de digérer ce genre de... Par contre, la presse vient là jouer un rôle important pour nous éclairer et nous donner les éléments. Bien sûr, il faut faire le tri. Parce que, je le dis ici, d'autant plus en ma qualité de président du Conseil des droits de l'homme, que, en toute honnêteté, la presse, elle est ce qu'elle est. Il y a, j'allais dire, une presse naturellement honnête par définition, mais il y a aussi le captage et parfois la perversion de l'information. Et nous devons faire aussi attention à cela pour que les éléments dont on discute, au niveau de l'UPR en particulier, qu'il y ait un tamis en quelque sorte. C'est très important pour nos débats. Pour les procédures spéciales, j'en finirai par là assez rapidement. Là aussi c'est important parce que peut-être plus que l'UPR, les procédures spéciales, sur cet unique point je voudrais insister, ont la possibilité de forger des normes. Ce sont des mandataires, y compris par exemple le rapporteur spécial sur la préservation d'un environnement sain et durable comme droit de l'homme, fait des visites de pays, fait aussi des rapports thématiques, et à ce moment-là, il fait des recommandations, parce qu'ils seront sur place, sur le terrain. Et il a une vision externe. On peut avoir dans un État donné ou dans tous les États, comme on le sait, beaucoup de débats, mais le rapporteur spécial vient avec, si vous voulez, la lecture des Nations Unies, avec la lecture légale des Nations Unies qui a été produite dans ce domaine. Et donc ces recommandations rejoignent souvent les nécessités vues au niveau global et pas uniquement au niveau local. Et donc il forge ces normes et c'est très important. Et d'ailleurs, je voudrais souligner que le rapporteur spécial chargé donc de l'application de la résolution, en tout cas du suivi de la résolution sur historique qui a été adoptée en 2021 sur l'environnement comme un droit de l'homme, l'environnement sain et durable, dans l'une de ses recommandations majeures, dans le rapport qu'il a présenté dès 2022, il a appelé à la nécessité de protéger la presse dans son travail sur les changements climatiques. Ce qui est fondamental, je pense. Je pense que ce sont des éléments que nous devons tous nous approprier. Je voudrais terminer, vous me le permettrez, que dans les priorités de la présidence cette année, la question des changements climatiques a été mise sur la table comme quelque chose de fondamental en lien corrélatif avec la sécurité alimentaire et la sécurité sanitaire. Et j'appelle à nos amis journalistes qui sont ici présents à donner de l'importance aussi à cet aspect-là, parce que je pense que c'est une approche qui est juste, parce qu'elle touche la vie des gens, parce qu'elle concerne, bien sûr, elle nous concerne tous, mais elle va au-delà de certaines polémiques qui peuvent exister, parce que nous touchons à des réalités. Nous touchons au fait qu'il y a 300 millions de personnes qui, à l'heure où je parle, sont dans l'insécurité alimentaire. Il y a près d'1 milliard de personnes qui sont dans la malnutrition. Je ne voudrais pas vous accabler avec les chiffres. Cela, vous en êtes tous conscients, mais lisez, s'il vous plaît. Je m'adresse à des journalistes. Lisez la presse, lisez les médias. On trouve tout. On trouve tout ce qu'il faut savoir sur ces sujets-là, et j'espère qu'on pourra le drainer de plus en plus au niveau du Conseil des droits de l'homme, au niveau des procédures dont vous avez parlé. Je vous remercie.
Merci beaucoup, ambassadeur. Vraiment, vous m'avez moi-même donné, moi je suis neuf à Genève, j'apprends sur les variétés de ce qui se passe dans le Conseil des droits humains, et c'était très intéressant de voir cette perspective sur les procédures spéciales et l'importance qu'elles pourraient avoir sur le sujet. À ce moment-là, I'm going to, as I said, ask one short question, but I'm sure it can be a very long answer, but I will pull rank and ask that it be as brief as possible, because I'm already not being very good at keeping time. So I count on your support. And the question is, how can member states ensure better cooperation and coordination on the rights to freedom of expression and access to information, more broadly and within the UN system more generally? So, Ambassador, I'm going to ask actually Ambassador Zibner first now.
Well, very quickly, of course, it needs cooperation between the government and states within the United Nations systems. And I'm sure, as UNESCO is doing, as we are trying also to do within the Human Rights Council, when it comes to the right of information, the right of... We should, for this purpose, of course, encourage more interaction with civil society and NGOs. This is fundamental. And of course, this question of the freedom of press and access to information as a right. This is our duty as Human Rights Council. We should have this human right-based approach when it comes to the question of the access of information. The more we will be efficient as a council on these issues, I am pretty sure, the more it will give the possibilities for the governments as a whole, also to consider that the role of the press, the role of the media is fundamental. It's fundamental because by ourselves sometimes we cannot, as I said before, not also reading report, but just, being close to the information on the ground when various issues, and particularly the climate change is impacting people. We have many processes within the Human Rights Council which we could use. There is a lack of time probably for me to develop, but we have the processes concerning indigenous people. They know that they could probably lose the biodiversity forever. And the Human Rights Council is also here to protect these people, And then it becomes the role of all the global, governance. We cannot accept the fact that we are about to lose 50% of the biodiversity in the world in the decades to come. So it needs then cooperation within the United Nations. We do know that there are many processes, but the Human Rights Council, I am sure, as we said, and before coming here with Mrs. President, the Human Rights Council is a focal point on these matters.
Thank you very much for your enthusiasm and your mandate towards this goal during this year. Ambassador Miculescu, now I would like to ask you the same question from the UNESCO General Conference perspective.
Si vous me permettez une
Absolument.
petite parenthèse avant ça, je voudrais vous remercier de tout mon cœur pour la discussion très intéressante qu'on a eue avant cet événement, parce qu'on a identifié, et je voudrais informer les États membres présents, on a identifié quelques très intéressantes possibilités de coopérer, de continuer notre coopération. Je voudrais aussi saluer la présence dans la salle de Madame la Directrice Générale. Je voudrais aussi saluer la présence dans la salle d'un ancien collègue, un ancien adjoint du directeur général de l'UNESCO, qui a géré les océans pendant tellement d'années. Je vous salue. Et bien sûr, je ne peux pas me restreindre de dire que j'ai vu la Roumanie présente, donc je suis enchantée de voir ma collègue ici. Well, I know. When I was ambassador to the UN, every ambassador who started it saying, "I'll be brief," we knew that he will never or she will never end. So I will avoid this expression. The good news is that actually there are lately very many initiatives that were actually stirred by the plan of action of the UN for the action plan for the journalists. And actually, I think that we have so many fora, we have so many bodies, but we have to be very careful with the coordination and we have to try not to overlap and to actually to maximize the impact. And I would just very fast mention a few of them because I think it's useful to remind them, especially before a discussion that will follow. So first of all, you have the group of friends on the safety of journalists. And you have groups of friends in New York, Vienna, Geneva, in Strasbourg, in Washington. So these groups of friends mean member states interested in the matter, but we have to increase the synergies between them. Second, you have the Media Freedom Coalition, which is a partnership of over 50 member states from 6 continents. Again, that can be actually included in this array of possible partners. You have the Universal Periodic Review and voluntary national reviews for the SDGs, which are excellent opportunities for the member states to exchange best practices. And actually, they can be supported in these processes by taking advantage of the resources and of the training materials that the UN system and the NGOs have. And of course, I will give you a UNESCO example, just one, the UNESCO's guidance note for member states on drafting UPR recommendations. And the last thing that I would like to mention is the fact that the member states can also invite relevant actors to participate in multilateral fora. And with some pride, I have to say, I would like to acknowledge also here the fact that UNESCO is a knowledge partner of the G20 Digital Economy Working Group this year. And we are participating in this context on discussions on information integrity or the ethics of artificial intelligence, which, again, is one of the possible subjects for our cooperation. So thank you very much for all this. I'm thrilled to be here, and I wish you very interesting and thought-provoking discussions this afternoon.
Thank you very, very much. I am sure our audience in room and online very much appreciated the insights, not only the presentation of a very important item such as a joint declaration from the heads of our very important governance structure of the UN, but also to have the pleasure of both of you with your insights on not only on the information and the knowledge that you hold, but also insights on how you plan to move forward to ensure our collaboration and our cooperation. So thank you very much. And now we will surely be moving to the panel. So I invite our panel members to come up to the stage. Thank you so much. I am going to move forward as we are now reaching our panels, the panel portion of our events, where we have a number of guests that will participate, that will give us their insights. We also have the pleasure of having moderators and colleagues that will then make conclusions, but this is the first panel. And for those of you who may not have the program in front of you, this is the panel on combating climate disinformation, which, as you heard, is one of the main issues that are a challenge today. So it's the disinformation aspect had to be followed by the protection of journalists and scientists. So with not too much ado, I'd like to introduce to you the moderator, and that is, she's sitting right next to me, and that's Ms. Isabelle Falconier, and she's the executive director of the Geneva Press Club. So on that note, I would ask her to take over the floor completely, including introducing the various panel members. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Director. Thank you, Ana Luisa. So welcome to our first panel. This panel is entitled Combating Climate Disinformation. Good afternoon, everyone. So World Press Freedom Day this year is dedicated to the importance of journalism in the context of the environmental crisis. It was about time. Is it already too late? How can journalists today combat climate disinformation, especially in a time of both press freedom crisis and economic crisis of the media industry? Do journalists have access to the data they need in order to report, to investigate properly? What do we, as their audience, want to read or not about climate and ecological issue? Please welcome our three panelists. They represent journalism and the press, both on a Swiss, European, and international level. We have with us Mira Selva. She's the chief executive of Internews Europe. She's based in London. Internews is a media support nonprofit working in over 100 countries. Mira Selva is also the co-founder of the Oxford Climate Journalism Network. She's an experienced journalist who has reported from the field across Europe, Asia, and Sub-Saharan Africa. She's also a senior research associate of the Reuters Institute, as well as a member of the Center for Economic Politic Research. We also have with us Caroline Vuillemin. Caroline Vuillemin is the general director of Fondation Hirondelle Foundation. Fondation Hirondelle is a Swiss NGO based in Lausanne, which provides information to population faces crisis or conflicts. Caroline joined Fondation Hirondelle 20 years ago. She was in charge of the Radio Okapi project before taking over as a director of the operation in 2008 already. We remember that Radio Okapi was the United Nations radio station in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, created in partnership with Fondation Hirondelle already. Caroline is also a board member of the Global Forum for Media Development, which helps public interest media, including radio, meet the economic, government, and technological transformation challenges they face. And finally, our third panelist is Samuel Schleffli. Samuel is a freelance Swiss German-speaking science journalist, reporter, editor, and storyteller. He regularly reports on science, society, international development, and the environment for magazines, newspaper, online platforms, TVs, and podcasts. During the last 6 years, he was part of the editorial team of One World, the magazine produced for the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation. He co-founded the podcast Treibhaus, der Klimatpodcast. He was awarded many prizes, amongst them the Prix Média by the Swiss Academy of Science for outstanding science journalism. a short question to begin with for the three of you. So World Press Freedom Day this year is dedicated to journalism in the context of environmental crisis. It was about time. Is it too late already? Mira?
Well, I think the answer to that always is the best time to have started would have been 20 years ago. The next best time is today. So we all know that the world is changing rapidly and we're heading towards kind of real problems for our planet. And the later we leave sustainable action, the harder it's going to be. But it's no point saying it's too late. We can't. We don't have that option.
Caroline Vima, too late or not?
No, not too late, but definitely at one of the worst times where the crises meet, the crisis of the media in terms of access to information, freedom to operate as journalists, big political and economic pressure on journalists to get the truth, as the time as the climate crisis is really in front of all of us.
And finally, Samuele, too late or not?
It's late, but as you all said, it's not too late. I would say it's very important that we sit together today because I'm convinced that quality science-based journalism is really a pillar of a functioning democracy. And there are hundreds or even thousands of environmental journalists all over the world doing a tremendous job in showing us the destructive elements of our behaviors, the destruction that's already going on, the causes of that destruction, and also the solutions to tackle these issues. I would especially also highlight the work of all my colleagues in the South, which have even much more challenging work conditions that we have here in Europe. And I think this is also, that we sit here together and this panel is also kind of giving respect to this important work that journalists are doing all over the world.
Yeah, this panel is asking how to combat climate disinformation, but first we have to know where the enemy comes from. So where does climate disinformation or misinformation come from? Mira, I think you have data from the Earth Journalism Network's upcoming report covering the planet to unveil to us today.
Yeah, so Internews runs the Earth Journalism. The climate crisis, but environmental issues in general. And it's our 20th anniversary this year. We have a report coming out on the 5th of June to coincide with World Environment Day. And what we want to really look at there is what are journalists seeing in the field, in the global south, in Asia and Africa, about climate disinformation. They all encounter it. They all say it affects their ability to work. It affects their safety. It affects the trust people have in journalism. If we look at where this misinformation comes from, it comes both from television and social media are the two big sources, and it comes often from politicians and governments and polarized debates which use climate as part of a kind of wider culture war. So instead of looking at the underlying data and the scientific facts, it becomes a political opinion. It also comes from lots of bad actors who have a vested interest in undermining the work of investigative journalists and also in undermining the calls for the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, for example, or asking for difference in behavior over how we consume fossil fuels. There are also bad actors who use it to kind of create a sense of chaos and despair. So throwing out a sense of there is nothing that can be done, it's too late, you might as well give up, because what that really does is stop people calling for policy change and meaningful action.
Where, Caroline Vima, in your opinion, disinformation come from, both talking about your point of view, Swiss-based, but also Africa-based?
I think it mainly comes from two reasons or two sources. A lot of the disinformation circulating actually doesn't come from media actors. And we all have to keep in mind about climate change or environmental issue, but many issues, the main producers of misleading information I don't like the word fake news, but lies and rumors and propaganda are not produced by media actors. So you have political, economic interest, state, private interest actors producing and being able now with the digital system to directly share widely, instantly, a lot of content that are not journalistically proven, verified, and as such, disinformation. But that said, for media actors, disinformation can come from just the many barriers that local journalists have in first accessing information, public information. In many countries, you cannot work in a ministry to request public data. It will not be given to you. It's not available online. There are no reports. So it's very difficult to have access to information. Thus, the reporting may have some elements of misinformation, not so much disinformation. A lot of information, when it is available by international scientists, is in English. So you have the language barrier. I'm not even talking about, very local languages like Swahili or Lingala or Tamashek, but just to get the information in French is a real issue for many journalists. And you also have the lack of training, basically general culture, general scientist, minimum scientist level of many journalists to understand these issues and being able to relate them to the public.
Samuel Echefli, in your experience, where does disinformation or misinformation come from? What about the role of social media, which seems so very overwhelming today?
What I think is really frightening, that somehow climate denial has become en vogue again. I think there was a certain time before the pandemic where we were somehow on a kind of a good track also when it came to climate action. But now in the past years, we really have seen a backlash, and I see climate denial now coming really from the highest ranks of politics also. Just an example, like here in Switzerland, the president of one of the biggest parties currently said that climate change is actually a good thing for farmers. And we have such kind of messages now coming really from politicians. We also can go to the US, of course. We have a lot of mis and disinformation from politicians being spread. So that's one thing I think is really frightening. The other thing is, of course, also big industry, and especially destructive industries like fossil fuel industry, but also agrochemical industries who are spreading a lot of misinformation. There was also, like an example here from Switzerland, there was one former CEO of an agrochemical company who actually said that organic farming is one reason of the climate crisis. So it's, and of course all these messages are then spread through social media, which definitely has a very important role also to spreading these misinformations to a young audiences. So I think, yeah, we definitely also have to think about how to regulate social media in a way that this kind of misinformation doesn't spread as it does currently.
Is it the role and the mission of media to put a line, a frontier between freedom of speech and fake news? Because, of course, a lot of things are said in the name of freedom of speech, freedom of expression. Mira, what's your opinion about that?
Freedom of expression with relation to journalism. I mean, journalism is not just about saying anything all the time. It's about telling a story, understanding what information your audience, wherever they may need and want to consume and then providing it as to the best of your ability. And it also is about holding truth to power. It's about holding the powerful accountable for their actions. It's about investigating corruption and wrongdoing. And it's also about telling the stories of communities. So within that, I think what you're talking about is, are you allowed to say anything? And does that, if you're not allowed to say something, does that fight your right to freedom of expression? And that's not really what journalism is about. I would say that we do believe very strongly at Internews that the best antidote to misinformation is a healthy information environment in which media play a crucial role. So I absolutely agree with you, Caroline, that journalists are not the ones putting out the misinformation, nor should they be held responsible for combating it. Because if journalists just start doing fact-checking and combating any rumours, they won't be able to do their actual job of investigating and storytelling. So, yeah, and then we then talk a little bit about, you mentioned social media regulation, and I think that's where the issue of platform accountability comes in, because, again, are you allowed to say anything you want online regardless of consequences? And I think we found in the world of human rights, and what happened in Myanmar and Sri Lanka, you know, and what happened with the messages that were spread on Facebook, that there isn't an undeniable right to freedom of expression at all costs. It does have to be fitted in with existing laws on hate speech, on incitement, on racism. You know, these laws already exist in the real world. They should also apply in the digital space.
Caroline Vima, you mainly work with Hirondelle in Sahel region medias. How can you help them work in the field on a daily basis? What kind of tools or what kind of help do you bring to them?
Well, yes, I think, you know, to really put the journalists in a framework where they have the means to move within the country, to go get testimonies and access to people to hear about concerns, realities on climate change, because it's not like one topic every 2 weeks or like a subject that comes in a chronicle. It's every day. You all heard, I think, about the heat wave in the Sahel region with the schools closing down, major social problems. There are death rates as never seen before of people above 55 dying because of the heat in Burkina Faso, in Niger, in Sahel currently. So helping the journalists having the means to get these stories out, always working based on facts. And I think not only on climate change, on any topics, but this is where the journalists and the scientists have the same objectives and can really work together, because you have facts. Based on facts, you can report. If the facts change, you do a new report and you improve the story and you continue the story. But really, the journalists, if they can verify, cross-check the facts, and this is how they can work effectively for the people. And this is the training, the working environment we put for them in context, as I said, in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, where just very basic access to electricity to work, access to internet to verify information, access to public data, and getting out to the street to ask people what they think is a real issue, and not only on climate questions.
Are people in the media you work with endangered regularly, and how can you protect them while doing their job?
You know, the statistics that UNESCO put about reporting on environmental issues and climate issues being the second causes of threats worldwide, this is not something we encounter in the Sahel currently. In the Great Lakes region, in DRC, in Burundi, in Rwanda, in Congo-Brazzaville, yes, because there are major issues about the protection of environmental and natural resources. But in the Sahel, this is not the first threat.
What about the network you're managing, the Oxford Climate Journalism Network? What kind of tools do you offer to your members? What kind of help? And did you have to help endangered journalists while working on climate crisis topics?
I'll talk about the Oxford Climate Journalism Network, but again, the Earth Journalism Network, which is interesting, one actually works more on the safety of journalists, because the Oxford Climate Journalism Network is an online platform, so it's digital only, and it's more focused on education. So it's based at the University of Oxford, so it's on providing education and training for all journalists, not just environmental ones. But the Earth Journalism Network does work with journalists around the world, and we do notice that they are encountering a huge number of threats that are very similar in patterns to the threats encountered by all journalists. So a rising number of legal threats, a huge amount of online harassment, especially targeted at women. What we do see in terms of parts of the world is in the Amazon basin, journalists are under very real physical danger. They're kidnapped, they're beaten up. Indigenous journalists in particular have very little protection from the state and are also the kind of first line of environmental defenders, and they are work under huge pressure. We also see in other countries, in India and Ecuador, you see sexual harassment, you see things that make journalists really self-censor, so end up deciding that they don't want to put their families at risk. So we work with them, we make sure they're connected to the relevant networks. We also provide digital safety tools and training on how to keep themselves online safe, and also try and provide a sense of solidarity, because sometimes these threats come to you via your phone, no one else sees them, no one else knows you're aware of them, that you're receiving them. So just to know that you're not alone can be tremendously helpful.
UNESCO, we've heard UN. What kind of expectations would you have towards those institutions or any kind of governments?
I think the recognition that this is a real threat has been incredibly useful. I mean, the IPCC itself recognized, I think in 2022, for the first time how important or how destructive climate misinformation was for their work and for the work of climate journalists. What we need on a very practical level is an ability to get journalists to safety. So we talk about impunity, but that's a long-term story to end impunity against attacks on journalists. But what we need in the immediate time is kind of a way to get journalists to safety, possibly by issuing them visas to get to other countries, to enable us to get support to them in terms of money, in terms of training, and then ways to enable them to carry on doing their reporting, so to give them professional tools, to give them new laptops. So it's that real, like, what we can really get from the international community is a way to, like, physically get them out sometimes.
Samuel Schleffler, you have reported from all over the world. You've worked for about environmental topics in Ethiopia, Mali, Ecuador, in Amman, in California. How do you think we could bridge the gap between global South reality and Europe-US reality through journalism, and make the audience understand that we all face the same environmental crisis?
I mean, that's definitely one of the potential also of environmental journalism. Also, when you report from abroad, that you can make a bridge between Europe or the US and countries in the South by just, especially when it's about scientific topics, especially if you also really in your reporting, if you insert, of course, voices from the global South, if you search for experts in these regions, it's very crucial, of course, to build up networks, as you both do. For example, there was a conference for science journalism in Senegal in 2022, also supported by UNEP and Fondation Hirondelle, where like journalists from Switzerland, France, but also, of course, from all West African countries gathered together and shared experiences. And these are networks that afterwards that you can still use in your reporting. You have colleagues where you who can give you advice on who are the experts for certain topics. So I think we really have to build up these networks between the different continents, between journalists, global perspective on environmental issues.
last question to level 3. If you're working on a TV, for a newspaper, you all work for an audience, so how to avoid and prevent kind of audience fatigue, because we hear every day that climate topics are boring, that they are kind of anxiety-inducing. So how to prevent that, how to try to be creative and help the kind of interest from the audience, wherever this audience can be. Mira and then Caroline.
Make it relevant to the audiences, so make sure there's accessible data. I do agree with Caroline that sometimes the biggest problem is that communities don't have data on climate change that's relevant to them. But if journalists can access that data, make it relevant, make sure the people telling the stories are from the communities and understand the communities and speak the same language, both literally but also metaphorically. And, you know, use other tools, use data visualization, use images, use voice. It's not just a block of text or a kind of one piece of TV. It can be a million ways of communicating.
Yes, I second this. And there is also the duty for media and journalists to bring solutions and to be the place where local experience are shared and can be duplicated. And we see in many contexts, actually, the wealth of traditional and cultural knowledge in terms of crops, going back to fonio instead of wheat and rice in some of the Sahel region. Traditions that were lost, that could be brought back, and media can be that bridge to share the experience. And I agree, it's not all about, kind of a top-down information that can sound very depressing to people, but allowing debates, allowing many voices, many realities to express their needs, their views from the capital, from the very rural area. Sometimes you hear debates in the capital about electricity transition and power transition in areas where there is no electricity. So you really have to also adapt, of course, and be close to the reality of the people so you are not off the topic.
Samuela, you started as a written journalist, and then you developed. Now you even producing documentaries, you film, you podcast. So how did you learn to be so creative and try to diversify yourself, but keeping working in those environmental fields?
Of course, I'm very privileged just by having a chance to do this. Then it's a lot of just experimenting, trying different things out. So I was always interested in different kind of medias, and as you just mentioned, like bring different forms of storytelling, film, illustrations, text, and infographics together. And I think there is really a potential also in telling the story multimedially and not just stick to the text. But that's also a privilege. And I think we also have to talk about the economical crisis that journalism now is facing. And especially freelance journalists, they really are in a difficult situation. Again, in the South much more than here in the North, but still also here. It's quite problematic also as a freelance journalist to actually find the means to do in-depth journalism and to do investigations which sometimes takes weeks or even months. So if institutions can also, or what are means that institution can't help, it's really also by putting up, like setting up funds, like setting up institutions also that support journalism, in-depth journalism, and then of course also that support training for younger journalists, because training and education that is all very important. But what is also important, I think, is really that there are opportunities also for young journalists. I mean, it doesn't make sense like to educate like very knowledgeable people if they don't afterwards find their position in journalism, because you just can't make a career there. So we really have to provide also better career opportunities, I think, for younger people. Otherwise, all of them go to NGOs, go to think tanks, or other fields. So it's, I think there the international community and the international organizations also have a responsibility.
Thank you. We have a video message, then we'll take a few questions. We have a video message from Professor Raymond Jaguessar. He's a professor in chemistry at the University of Guyana. He's also a foreign secretary of the Caribbean Academy of Science. So we can play the video message. Thank you.
My name is Raymond Jaguessar. I am professor in chemistry at the University of Guyana and foreign secretary of the Caribbean Academy of Sciences. I bring you greetings from the Caribbean Academy of Sciences. I must thank UNESCO via the Geneva Liaison Office in providing me with this opportunity to make this presentation on World Press Freedom Day. Climate change is everybody's business and has affected the entire world. It is said to result from global warming. Caribbean is part of the SID, so they are affected significantly by climate change. Climate change has also affected other countries such as the United States, England. Thus, it is highly imperative that measures are put in place to curb climate change. One of these methods is to embark on research on climate change in each country so that solving these effects can lead to continual sustainable development in each country. So scientists doing this research must be given the academic freedom to report precisely, correctly via publication of articles, via transmission of information to the media and television station. There must not be disinformation or misinformation. Once these findings are published, then governing bodies such as United Nations, UNESCO, ISC, RSC, etc., will take the necessary measures or will come together to enact policies and strategies to mitigate climate change within that country and other parts of the world. Scientists must also be given the freedom from the government, from non-governmental organizations, companies, and from the universities that they may be attached. How can this be achieved? I thought about 4 mechanisms can be put in place. One, government leaders, representatives from various countries can sign an accord at climate change conference to ensure the safety and of scientists. There should be freedom of speech. There should be no hindrance. There should be no victimization of scientists researching in this area as it pertains to environmental issues, because global warming and climate change affects the entire world. A second mechanism is that scientists should purely be involved in scientific endeavors and not to be involved in politics or to blame any political party in that country for causing environmental damages or degradation. Thirdly, scientists should have an endorsement from the university authorities and from the government of non-victimization within that country. Scientists should also monitor recordings that is transmitted to the media and television station. They should have a pre-recording, and which they should have in their possession, so that they can verify the information that they sent. I thank you again, and I thank Geneva Liaison Office for providing me with this opportunity to make this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe a short reaction from our three panelists to what we just heard. Maybe your relationship to scientists, Mira.
Thank you.
Yeah, two things. Scientists are kind of amongst the most trusted sources of information for the public in much of the world, certainly in countries like India and Brazil, where the media is under huge pressure and is continuously discredited, and people are, more inclined to trust scientists. There's also a really interesting thing about how journalists interact with scientists in this space, and we have done quite a lot of work in trying to bring journalists and scientists together to understand what each of them need, because I think he's absolutely right that scientists shouldn't be pushed into making political statements when they're uncomfortable doing so, and journalists, in questioning scientists about their work, really should be able to understand both how the scientific methods operate, the principles, not asking scientists to say things that go further than what they're comfortable with in both their methodology and their implications, but also really understand what it's like to report on uncertainty. Because, science is an uncertain science. It's an uncertain subject. So you need to have a space to say, we think this is true, this is our hypothesis, we're testing it, it might be wrong. That doesn't mean that I am wrong and everything I say is a huge mistake and shouldn't be trusted. So I think we need to work on both.
Samuel Schläfli, you were yourself trained first as a scientist in chemistry before you became a journalist. So now, as a journalist, your own relationships to scientists.
I totally agree what you just said. I think it's all about know the limits of the field of scientists and know the limits of studies and being able to interpret these studies in a meaningful way also. Yeah. I also think that we have, like journalists, we have a really important role to play in doing this translation between science and the public, just by understanding the language of science and being able to make this transformation, that this knowledge which is there becomes valuable to a greater public. And of course, for that, I think you have to train journalists also in science. Yeah. Journalists have to get used in also interacting with scientists, and there are programs that are exactly doing this, which I think is really a good thing. And then sometimes you really, as a journalist, you really also have to be critical that there is also a certain danger that scientists sometimes actually want to sell their own science and make statements that go beyond what they are actually researching. So it goes a little bit in both ways, I would say. But I think, yeah, it's about education and it's about experience also. Yeah.
Caroline Bima, a comment?
Yes, it made me think, listening to the professor, that an element we have not really addressed here is the necessity in everything regarding disinformation is media literacy and digital literacy, and actually building bridges with scientists where not only the journalists can translate scientific evidence or scientific research to be explained to people as part of a fact-checking element, so that people understand, can debunk the lie or the rumor, is important. And likewise, I think scientists should be trained, media trained, how to answer an interview, how to be at ease in a debate or getting a question from a public audience, and maybe get down from some of their very high-level thinking to be at the level of the people. So it's probably both ways.
Thank you. It's time we take about a few questions or comment from the audience. So yes, we have a first hand here. So who is it? You have the floor.
Thank you.
for such an important event. My name is Hüseynova. I'm a journalist and human rights defender. My questions related with climate of justice, related with the journalists, related with human rights and climate rights defenders and scientists. Because I'm originally from Azerbaijan. This year, Azerbaijan hosted COP29. And imagine, since Azerbaijan got the status in Dubai, Azerbaijan jailed 20 very famous media outlets representatives, like 20 journalists, human rights activists, environmental activists, even people, rights defenders who defend disabled people's rights, and some of our colleagues who participate in this building on-site event related with the COP29 issues and situation ahead COP29 in Azerbaijan related with media freedom and human rights and civil society environment. These people prosecuted. How it's possible, because previous panelists they mentioned about important UN treaty bodies like mechanisms, but how it's possible to mobilize international global solidarity to use like COP29, international journalist networks, climate journalist networks, to bring attention to prosecutions of environmental journalists, investigative journalists who expose these corruptions in countries like Azerbaijan, Egypt, or United Arab Emirates. Because without this, even if we speak a lot about important topics, no one going forward, especially like from scientific community, if they see for like famous journalists jailed in Azerbaijan, do you think any kind of famous scientist in Azerbaijan able to speak out on issues related with the climate change? I thank you.
Thank you. We'll take three, we'll hear 3 questions, then we'll ask 3 questions together. Yes, please.
Can you hear me? Yeah. I have a question based on my experience in Ireland, where I ran the campaign to try to keep the country free of genetically modified patented seeds in agriculture. And it was extraordinary during the 7 years that I was doing that to see the extent to which public opinion and the media and the scientific institutions and the members of parliament and the members of the Senate and government ministers had already got a whole view of the subject that came straight out of the playbook of the biotech industry lobby. It was extraordinary to see when there was a vote coming up at the European Parliament on whether to authorize the cultivation of a new GM variety of maize, for example. You would find we would organize discussions and talk shows on TV and so on, and the response from the, quote, establishment was you had ministers and all the names of people that I mentioned before, the types of people, and journalists who would be publishing and quoting the same bullet points literally provided by the animal feed trade industry and the biotech lobby. And it was shocking to me to see the extent to which journalists could easily be misled by these kinds of preconceived ideas. So I don't want to take up your time, but my question is, do you think that it's important also for journalists themselves to better exercise their capacity for critical thinking when covering these issues?
Oh, excuse me. Sorry, I didn't see that was Lithuania before. So yes, please. Thank you. Sorry. Afterwards. Thank you.
Shortly wanted to thank Austria, Chile, and all organizers for convening us today to this panel, and it was very insightful discussion, and it's hard to follow up on what was already said, but just wanted to share a couple of Lithuanian views on this topic. We believe that journalists and media workers deserve to have safe environment to implement their duties. No laws should ever criminalize or restrict their work. Lithuania has a long-standing commitment to promote the right to freedom of expression, the safety of journalists and media workers. Currently, we're implementing the 2023-2025 action plan for the protection, security, and empowerment of journalists. In addition, we are a host country for many human rights defenders, journalists, and activists. Today, the world faces multiple crises. Now is a critical time when we have to make many important decisions as human beings, which will affect how we and next generations live in the future. And only through scientific and environmental journalism we can successfully promote science, develop public environmental awareness, and contribute to climate change communication. Scientific misinformation can have serious consequences as it can lead to public confusion, distrust of science, and even harm the public health. Once a false or misleading claim is widely disseminated, it can be difficult to undo the damage and convince people of the truth. This is, we believe, because misinformation often appeals to people's emotions, which are difficult to overcome with logical arguments or evidence. And it can also cause public panic, which can undermine public safety. We hope that good practices that were shared today will pave the way for a safer and more enabling environment for journalists to fulfill their main purpose, to provide citizens with the information they need to make the best possible decision about their choices, their communities, their societies, and their governments. And dear panelists, as you already mentioned, social media and their regulations, I had a question on maybe your opinion how social media companies themselves could be more involved in preventing spread of scientific and environmental disinformation. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to Azerbaijan, please.
Thank you. I would like to also to thank the organizers. I have rather the comment in response to the previous, let's say, voiced allegations towards my country, and we express our regret that such an important discussion are being abused by some puppet NGOs, attempting to politicize and instrumentalize COP29 as a tool of pressure, and of course reject the allegations voiced by the representative of corrupted NGO naming himself as human rights defender. The so-called assessments of these NGOs do not correspond to and even counter the position of international organization and national community towards Azerbaijan as a whole. The media in Azerbaijan is free, and Azerbaijan COP29 presidency is very open to cooperation and dialogue with mass media. In Azerbaijan, there is a visible revival in the civil society sector as my country continues to build dialogue and cooperation with local and international NGOs, not just within COP29, but other matters as well, so long as this dialogue produces constructive results and is geared towards addressing genuine problems. The importance of the work of media workers, environmental activists, and scientists is undeniable in promotion of the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment, especially in raising awareness about climate change and other environmental challenges. And we're witnessing today the attitude of some countries towards the journalists, in some Western countries, and environmental activists. For example, the recent incident of detention of the prominent climate activist Greta Thunberg during the peaceful demonstration in The Hague is just one example. Azerbaijan's COP29 presidency is a recognition of my country's efforts with respect to the green transition, and it's unlikely that some puppet NGOs under the influence of foreign circles will be able to cast a shadow on the image of my country as well as the importance of this event. And in the conclusion, I would like to reiterate the unwavering commitment of the government of Azerbaijan to promotion and protection of human rights. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll take a last question, please, Ms.
So I was saying that nowadays a lot of academic work, there's not enough funding for it, so academics are turning towards the private sector to get funding. And oftentimes their results can't be as impartial as they would wish them to be. This is a question for you, Mira. Do you provide some kind of training or some kind of do you have like a database of trustworthy sources when it comes to scientific data? Like, how do your journalists go about navigating this minefield?
Ms. Miller, please, you can answer this first question. Thank you.
Answer that one straight away. So, yes, at the Oxford Climate Journalism Network, we talked about data, so we set up a database for scientists, and the idea was to encourage scientists from the rest of the world, from Asia and Africa, to really input their details into this database and to have it as a source for journalists as well. And so the idea is that it would raise their visibility and hopefully enable that they could then secure funding and secure kind of international funding when they needed it as well, and also connect them to journalists, not just journalists from their own countries, but also journalists in Europe, in North America, so it's a shared resource for journalists and academics, and it's working very, very well on that one. Thank you.
Would you, Caroline and Samuel, have a very short answer to any of the questions that have been asked before, Alan or else, but very briefly, please?
Well, maybe on the question and remark from Lithuania, I think in regards to what you reaffirmed in terms of commitments and values, I really encourage member states to build coalitions of like-minded states, because you may know that the current drafts for the Pact for the Future, for the Declaration for Future Generation, for the Digital Compass do not include the word media, the word access to information, the word freedom of expression in their first drafts. As civil society, we had to provide inputs in this room on March 15th for the Pact for the Future to ask that access to information, right to freedom of expression be included. And this is now the responsibility of the states to make sure that these values, not only to be able to tackle climate change, but any major issue, global issues about health, about education, about social cohesion, without access to information, without integrity of information, this is not going to work. Thank you.
Samuel Schäffli, last word or comment?
Maybe to the question of the gentleman regarding Ireland. I mean, lobbies are a huge problem, I would say. And here we maybe come back also a little bit to the economic situation in journalism. I mean, it just needs really a lot of time if you want to get into the details of the report, if you speak with different scientists, critical scientists about like genetically modified organism, things like that, and bring all that knowledge together. So if you're in a newsroom where you just have to constantly pull out news one after the other, you're probably much more prone that these kind of lobby statements then just are taken up and will be published in the media. So it's really also, I think the lack of critical reflection is maybe also really also a picture of the current state also of media. And I think it needs like independent investigative journalism centers. Now more and more there are centers funded also by foundation, like for examples, where this really critical work can be done because the people working there still have the resources and the time also to dig into these large amounts of documents and reveal the facts.
Thank you very much. Thank you, all of three. I have now the pleasure to give the floor to Mr. Renaud de Villaine for the closing remark. Renaud de Villaine is the Media and Safety Advisor of the OHCHR. You have the floor, Renaud.
Thank you very much. I hope it's working. Yeah. Thank you very much. It is a huge task to summarize this very rich discussion, but I think the discussion showed one thing, the multifaceted of disinformation and the fact that it is linked to two main causes that were mentioned during the discussion. First, the proliferation of actors with the rise of social media in particular, and also, very importantly, the lack of access to reliable information in many parts of the world. It shows also the variety of disinformation spreaders and the fact that many of them are from political origins, with political interests being behind disinformation, corporates, lobbyists from various sources, but also sometimes also media actors, especially from TV or social media. Then a huge part of the discussion, and it was very interesting to listen to that part of the discussion, was about the solutions, some of the solutions that can be put forward. But solutions are linked also to another variety, which is a variety of duty bearers. States are the first responsible for tackling this disinformation, but also for ensuring a safe environment for journalists and scientists to work. States are also responsible to ensure access to information and to reliable information. And a solution that was also discussed during the discussion was the need for regulation in order to tackle disinformation. But there I will speak from the OECHR point of view. We have to be careful when it comes to legislation to tackle disinformation and to tackle what is so-called fake news, because they have a double facet also. And it is important to anchor that kind of legislation in human rights and in the international human rights framework. It is also important that in the design of such legislation or such policy to tackle disinformation, there is a participation of journalists, but when it comes to environment, also a participation of scientists. Then there is also the responsibility of the international community, I would say, at large, meaning member states of the Human Rights Council, member states of the General Assembly, member states of the UNESCO Assembly, and also international organizations like UNESCO or OECHR. And there is really a need to support journalists. We could hear from the discussion. To support journalists through training on science, but also training for journalists to learn how to cross-check information in order really to build reliable information. Also support, and it was interesting to listen to that, support to independent investigative journalist centers, as it seems that there are more and more of them. There is also a huge need to support, as it was mentioned, digital and media literacy programs, and I would say from a OECHR point of view to integrate human rights in those digital and media literacy programs. It is also important to shed light more and more on voices from the Global South and to support journalists from the Global South, and also to support to accessible media programs, especially accessible to people from the Global South. And finally, there is a need to support, and it is very important when it comes to environment, to support freelance journalists, because we can see around the world that most of the journalists covering environment are freelance journalists. And as freelance journalists, they are more victim of many kinds of human rights violations around the world, from legal harassment to smear campaigns and disinformation. So I think there we have a lot of food for thoughts, and I think the second part of the discussion targeting more journalists will be very important and interesting to enrich our thinking about the subject.
Well, if you allow me, I would like to then conclude completely and close the first panel. But I cannot do so without first thanking Isabel for keeping us interested with great questions, but at the same time making sure everything moves as quickly as possible. And I know it's not easy, so Isabelle, thank you very, very much. And last but not least, thank you, Renaud, for concluding so well a very difficult discussion. I mean, the feeling I had actually listening in was we really touched the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more and so many facets of this Rubik's Cube that need to be addressed. And so thank you very much for keeping it interesting, fast and quick. But we also need to keep the time. So with that, I ask you to please join the audience. And I am not going to have a break. Otherwise, we're not going to keep to the time. And more important, I will not keep my promise to the Director General of UNOG that by 6 o'clock sharp, I would be out of here with all of you. So I ask, please, that the second panel, Protecting Environmental Journalists and Scientists panel be up. And as was said by Renaud, I think it comes perfectly in line and it dovetails well with the first panel. And yes, thank you for bringing your own signs. No, that's not his. Quickly, the glasses and the water. From UNESCO, Andrea Cairoli. Andrea, the floor is yours. Just press it and they'll do it up in the technical booth.
Thank you very much. Conscious of time, let's go to business. And as said by the previous speakers, this panel is going to be truly, hopefully, solution-oriented. So we heard about the problem, the issue of safety of journalists, but also the issue of safety of scientists as a source, as partner, as of course, researcher. We heard also about the essential role that these two categories have in, of course, addressing the challenges we are all aware of. And now, in this panel, we'll try to further explore, deep dive into what are the solutions to protect them, learning also from the over 10 years of implementation of the UN Plan of Action on Safety of Journalists. So we have remarkable speakers and panel here. I would propose, again, conscious of time, that I will introduce them one by one when we go into the topic. And to sort of set the scene and start, actually, we have a special, let me say, gift from the first panelist, Jamil Chald, who's a career and award-winning investigative journalist, and actually brought us a video, which is a testimony, which I think is good to set the scene and to go also back to the reason we are here. So can you tell us more what is the video that we are about to see?
Yes, good afternoon to everyone. I think you can listen. It is a video of what was the Amazon forest in a specific place in the Xingu River in the state of Pará. A dam was built, and this was the result of the dam.
So after this very, very moving video, I said that you are an award-winning journalist, but also you have several roles and experiences that related to what we are discussing here, because you are also president of the Foreign Press Association of Switzerland, but you have been working at local level in your country, reporting on environmental issues. You also are a renowned investigative journalist that produce investigation that actually had impact in the 2 continents. So also, I think in order to have a bit of different flow from the previous panel, the idea is here I ask you some questions and then you give a sort of initial statement of 5 minutes, and then the same with the other speakers, and then of course we'll give the floor back to those in the room. So the set of questions to you, one is more personal, let's say, because I think I understood you're just back from the Amazon, so if you can tell us what is the atmosphere in reporting there, what is the real world of those reporting on the ground environmental issues. And then the other one is more in your other capacity as part of the Vladimir Herzog Institute, which just published, I understood, the new study on violence against journalists. So what are the main outcome of that? And then leading to the topic of this panel, what are the solutions to tackle these challenges? Over to you, Jamil. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrea. So in fact, I spent some time in the Amazon writing a story on the social and the economic and the environmental impact of that dam. Communities had their lives turned upside down since the dam was built in one of the main rivers of the Amazon forest called Xingu. But what I also found out was the complete sense of vulnerability and fear surrounding journalists, activists, and the researchers in the region. Actually, in the state of Pará, Pará is the state that will host COP30. So just so we can have that in perspective, where COP30 will be happening. And the first moment I realized this fear, this vulnerability, was in the city of Altamira, when my very first interlocutor kept looking over his shoulder to see if he could actually speak. And that was very telling of, obviously, the situation we were. And it was not a paranoia. And coming to your question on the report, as you said, I'm part of the Institute Vladimir Herzog in São Paulo, and the Institute has just published a report on basically violence against journalism covering environmental issues. And the report is very clear that these journalists covering illegal mining, deforestation, indigenous lands issue, are under a very huge threat. As the previous panel mentioned, it is a fact. And what do the numbers show on the Amazon, precisely on the Amazon? So according to the National Federation of Journalists, 230 cases of violence against journalists were registered in the last 10 years in the 9 states that form the Amazon. Also, he pointed out that very little changed since 2022, when Bruno Pereira and Dom Phillips were assassinated. Dom Phillips was a journalist, Bruno a scientist previously working for the agency, the state agency related to indigenous. They were murdered in 2022, and what the report now shows is that very little has changed. As a Brazilian poet, Milton Hatum, wrote, which Brazil hides behind this Amazonic humanity? Well, obviously, the reality is a very bleak one. The Amazon is at war, a war for natural resources, for control, for land. And the deliberate omission of the previous government opened an incredible space for criminal groups to act. Corruption thrives, and in the Amazon, to be honest, rule of law is an endangered species. And I fear, actually, that in some places, it has already disappeared. Denouncing this reality requires the work of journalists. A blackout of information in the Amazon is a threat to the planet. That is the reality. If we don't cover what happens there, if we rely only on satellite images on the amount of deforestation, you will not have the full picture. We need people in the Amazon covering these issues. So assuring the press can work in the Amazon is not only an issue related to the safety of media professionals, but the preservation of the forest itself. We actually need journalism to breathe. We need journalism to survive, literally.
Thank you very much. So we move to Barbara Trionfi. Barbara Trionfi has been leading a major international NGO in the field of safety of journalists, International Press Institute. In that capacity, you were part of those that over 15 years ago contributed to, to the consultation developing the UN Plan of Action, then part of those that have been implementing over almost a bit more than a decade, and then also there were a discussion in Vienna where also IPI is based, hosted by Austria and in cooperation with UNESCO CHR about taking stock of the lesson learned in over a decade of implementation of the UN Plan of Action on safety of journalists. But then when you stepped down as executive director, actually decided to devote yourself to this specific issue. Over the past years, you've been researching on the specific issue of the safety of environmental journalists. So the first question to you is, of course, we have seen the situation in a specific continent. Could you please help us in a bit broadening, telling a bit more the findings of your research? And then in connection to that, we know what, we heard what will be what are the challenges, and then in your experience, what are the solutions and what we can hope for and we should do, and we should also learn from the experience of implementing UN Plan of Action on safety of journalists.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Andrea, for your questions, and thanks to the organizers for having me today. That's correct. So I did spend the last year researching opportunities and challenges of environmental journalism, and in particular publishing 2 reports with the International Press Institute, the second of which was made possible by the support of Austria, and spoke specifically on the press freedom challenges, attacks and press freedom obstacles. And yeah, many of those have been mentioned also by the panel before. There are physical harassment, legal harassment, issues related to online attacks, issues related to access to information, and many more. Also major challenges related to attacks against the sources of journalists. That we very much know that journalists depend on the information, on the fact that the sources also reveal the information, in particular investigative journalism. Maybe what I wanted to look a little bit is what makes environmental and climate journalists particularly vulnerable, if you want to say that, or what makes them a target. Indeed, the attacks against journalists that we see against environmental journalists broadly correlate to the press freedom situation in general in different countries. So countries where press freedom is more challenges, we are also more likely to see more attacks against environmental and climate journalists. However, climate and environmental journalists, they come up against big economic interests. You just mentioned Amazon is at war. There is really a war going on, and we see also, because of the urgency to address the climate crisis, polluting industry are, if you want, coming, maybe certainly not enough, but they are coming under pressure, and they're willing to do to great lengths to limit the ability of their critics to hamper their businesses. And of course, environmental journalists are one of the targets.
We've also seen that, for example, many of the journalists I contacted for my research said that the more money there is in a certain industry, the more likely it is that journalists come under pressure. Journalists in Latin America were giving the example of covering industries related to carbon credits versus industry that trade in carbon credits versus covering the mining industries. And there are major challenges, physical challenges in covering mines, the mining industry, because very often there is a cooperation between mines and organized crimes. But when covering industry-related, like wrongdoings in the issue of carbon credit, because there is so much money in these businesses, the likelihood to be sued, the likelihood of lawsuits, even SLAP being strategic lawsuits against public participation, so lawsuits that have, in most cases, no foundations, is extremely high. And yet, that's where journalism is important. Today, we have seen the front page of the New York Times. There was an article about the fact that in the Amazon, actually, there is some efforts to plant trees again, which seems good. It is good. It is good. It is definitely a good news because carbon credits brings more money than farmland however, who is going to check? Who is going to control that this industry is also is not corrupt? There are no wrongdoings there. These are the journalists, and there is a lot of money there. So I mentioned before, the risk to environmental journalists is also compounded by cooperation between private companies engaged in environmentally harmful businesses and organized crimes groups. And in some realities, these also work together with state actors that work in collusion with illegal actors. We see police and military and the military working in collusion with the organized crimes group in certain regions. Environmental destruction also very often, or environmental stories very often bring journalists to remote locations where the rule of law is often weaker. There is less access to protection for journalists. A point that I like to make is the importance of local journalism for local environmental journalism. Why is that? Because, first of all, local journalists very often enjoy greater trust from their communities. So it's important that they are the ones that talk about climate, that talk about such polarized issues as climate and environment, but also because local journalism knows the reality best. They know what are the solutions at the local level, and many of the solutions are also at the local level, and yet local journalists are even more under attack. Is to the point that some international journalists that would normally cooperate in their investigations with local journalists, because that's normally the most effective way to do that. Sometimes they say, you know, we are being very careful about cooperating with local journalists because we are the ones going out when the investigation is finished, but the local journalists will stay and will be targeted. It was mentioned before, many environmental journalists are freelancers. That is because the news industry, as they face crisis, the first ones to go are the science and environmental journalists. The last one to be hired again are the science and environmental journalists, because this topic is not valued enough. There is politics, there is finance, there are many other topics in journalism that are given more importance, and editors very often believe that they can outsource environmental coverage to freelancers, and yet this makes them vulnerable. So, and finally, I wanted to mention, obviously, polarization. We spoke before about disinformation. There is a topic that where there is a lot of polarization, so this also leads to online attacks and others. The remedies, what can we do? We mentioned duty bearers, and first of all, I believe the first step, and that is why it's so great that UNESCO has placed the focus on this issue, is let's understand the problem better. Let's make sure that people understand. I was in Santiago for UNESCO's conference over the past days, and so many people said, I did not think that this was an issue. I did not realize that this was an issue. So let's make sure that there is a focus on environmental journalism. Why do we need environmental journalism? Why do we need it in order to tackle the climate crisis? And why do we need to support it? And how can we support it? Looking at what states can do. Legal harassment is a major, major problem. We said SLAP is widespread and contributes to self-censorship that is so widespread. So, and yet, we have seen how successful anti-SLAP legislation has been in Canada, in the United States, in countries that have passed anti-SLAP legislation. The Council of Europe has put out excellent guidelines for anti-SLAP legislation. The European Parliament has put out some guidelines. They're limited in scope, but still very good. Let's make sure that we look into those, and states should adopt anti-SLAP legislation because it does help. At the same time, journalists need legal support. Many journalists, we said, many are freelancers, others are small outlets. They don't have access to legal support. Legal support meaning both the ability to check your articles before they're published and legal support if you're sued. There are a couple, but we need many more organizations that offer pro bono legal support to journalists. Again, very important. Also because the thing about SLAP suit is that if you have the money and the resources to fight them in court, very often you're going to win them, especially if the report was accurate in the first place, which in most cases is. But journalists don't have the resources to fight them in court for years, very often. So let's make sure that they receive the legal support to fight these lawsuits. And very often whoever offers legal support will be paid back in the end, thanks to the victory, but also is a victory for free expression, thanks to because it sets a precedent. Mentioned and impunity. UNESCO has done a fantastic work with the plan of action toward ending impunity. I believe, correct me, Andrea, if I'm wrong, we went from 95% impunity to 85 or something around that line. It seems is still appalling, but it's so important. There is a snowball effect there. So let's keep up the fight against impunity. We've seen also in the UNESCO report, and I've also heard it, a lot of attacks against journalists covering climate protests. Let's make sure police is trained. Let's make sure that police knows how to behave with journalists, that there is a right to climate protest. There is our right to know what people are protesting about. So the journalists can't be attacked for covering protests. And maybe looking at resources that the news outlets need. Some were mentioned before by Mira and Caroline. Risk assessments and safety protocols can save lives. And yet, again, the news outlets and freelance journalists need resources to carry out these risk assessment and to work with safety protocols. The industry needs to do more, of course. But and journalists need to do more in order to get used to always work with this type of safety protocols. Not only journalists who cover the wars and conflict, but journalists who cover environment because of the level of risk. But media support organizations, donors, need to support journalists in getting there through resources. And maybe one last point I would like to mention. We have seen that visibility offers protection. Journalists who have greater visibility are less likely to be attacked. The case of Don Phillips, one of the very few cases, well, Don Phillips, when he was killed together with Bruno Pereira in the Amazon, the initial reaction by the Bolsonaro government was to ignore that. And yet, because of international pressure, an investigation has started, and now there is likely to be one of the few cases that is not going to end up with total impunity. So greater visibility leads to to protection of journalists, and yet whenever it's too risky for those who want to silence journalists to attack the journalists, the sources get attacked. So let's make sure that while we protect journalists, we also protect environmental defenders, activists, and sources. And I'll leave it there, Andrea. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll come to that because our next speaker will especially focus on protection of scientists and researchers. And thank you also for these very concrete suggestions. I propose, before moving to the scientists, to close, let's say, the cycle with the journalists with the last testimony, a very moving one. Again, thanks, Jamil, for bringing this. It's actually a testimony from a woman local journalist. Can you tell us more, please?
Yes, it's a very interesting case of a fisherwoman in that same river, in the Xingu River, who actually became a journalist, mainly because the fish disappeared. So she decided that she had to tell the story because there was a blackout on information in that region of the Amazon. And she decided that she would try to relay this information, not to the world, but at least to the rest of Brazil, so you can have an idea of the isolation that actually these regions have. So she sent us a video message also.
Sou Sara Rodrigues Lima, sou aqui da Volta Grande do Xingu. Estou aqui na ilha do Pacuciringa. Aqui na Volta Grande do Xingu, as grandes ameaças que acontecem aqui foi o implantamento de uma usina hidrelétrica chamada Belo Monte, que a partir do momento que chegou aqui, começou a desviar de 80% das águas para geração de energia, né? Então, com esse desvio da água que fizeram, a Volta Grande do Xingu está passando por um momento muito difícil, um colapso no ecossistema. Por quê? Porque há 9 anos que não temos mais a piracema. A piracema é a reprodução do peixe, né? O peixe, a água tem que inundar o igapó para os peixes começarem a entrar para a desova. Isso não acontece mais. Hoje os frutos que é a alimentação do peixe, como o sarão, a goiabinha, entre outros, está caindo no seco. E com isso também, o peixe também não tem mais o fruto que era para cair no tempo certo, né, que é para comer, que hoje cai no seco. Sem contar também que os pescadores e beiradeiros aqui da Volta Grande do Xingu estão passando por momentos muito difíceis, que é a insegurança alimentar. Por falta do peixe, muitos deles estão largando de pescar, estão largando o meio tradicional, por falta de peixe para pescar e para comer também, para sua alimentação. Hoje em dia, para viver na Volta Grande, hoje está sendo muito difícil e muito complicado. Porque, além disso tudo que está acontecendo, também a água está imprópria para beber. A água está numa coloração muito feia, que antes a gente não tinha isso, né? Na água que hoje está tendo. Também, sem contar também que há vários tipos de peixes que estão, que nem a pescada, a curvina está com má formação. O peixe está muito magro. E muitos pescadores estão desistindo, né, desse meio tradicional, que nasceu e se criou na beira do Xingu. Sempre teve como trabalho a pescaria. E hoje sair, né, largar a pescaria, eles não estão largando porque quer. É porque não tem mais o peixe para eles pescar. Eles estão vivendo de diária agora. O governo do estado e o governo federal tem que ver isso que está acontecendo aqui na Volta Grande. Porque a fome chegou aqui na Volta Grande. Antes não existia isso.
This was Sara Rodrigues Lima, a fisherwoman that became a citizen journalist, a citizen reporter, to have her voice heard. Thank you for bringing this. I'm now turning to Vivi Stravro, who's the Executive Secretary of the International Science Council Committee for Freedom and Responsibility in Science. She also has an extensive career as clinical psychologist and development worker in the humanitarian emergency, in post-conflict, in NGOs, in the UN. So now you are bringing us the perspective of researchers and scientists. A bit like the previous speaker, two questions. One on what is the problem, what are the funding of the institution you've been leading, and I know that you recently published also a report on protecting science in time of crisis. What are the evidence, what are the figures, the global, and then how can we better protect scientists, what we should do, what we should learn also, and how the protection of scientists is interconnected with the protection of journalists.
Thank you. Well, scientists and journalists are threatened for the same reasons: to shut down their curiosity, to stop their search for understanding, to silence their voice. So how can we better protect scientists? I'm going to focus on environmental scientists and researchers. Not all researchers, of course, are scientists. It's people who work together in the process of scientific inquiry. I believe the Council, the International Social Science Council, which is the biggest grouping of science bodies in the world, that it's part of the scientific community's responsibility to raise the alarm, to advocate for the safety of scientists, and to enter into strategic alliances working for practical measures to defend the right to science, Article 27 in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and to prevent, protect, and support researchers across the world. Access to information, monitoring threats to scientific freedom, monitoring attacks against scientists, and getting reliable data in this respect is critical. We heard from Barbara, people don't know, right? The 2024 Academic Freedom Index shows that there is a global shift towards less academic freedoms for the average citizen. The world average score has dipped in the last 10 years, back to roughly Cold War levels. And these substantive declines span all regions and, importantly, all types of political systems. There's no comfort zone here. These trends are accompanied by an unprecedented number of murdered environmental advocates over the last decade. While there is no data tracking attacks on environmental scientists specifically, a Global Witness report referred to by Ambassador Fuentes indicates that 2020 was the worst year on record regarding lethal attacks on environmental defenders, some of whom are scientists. So at a time when science is of paramount importance to human and environmental well-being, scientific freedom is under attack in many places. This is a recurrent phenomenon in times of crisis and very definitely rising. A 2022 survey published in the journal Science showed that there was an outbreak of harassment towards scientists during the COVID-19 pandemic. The recent UNESCO publication, The Safety of Scientific Researchers, points to evidence showing that more than 1 in 5 scientific researchers working on COVID-19 and about 2 in 5 of those working in climate research have faced threats to their personal safety in the course of doing their science. 39% of the climate change researchers reported online harassment or abuse related to their scientific research. And at a population level across the world, 1 in 2 women scientists have experienced sexual harassment in the course of doing their science. Now, what are these threats? The most common type of threat referred to our committee, my Committee for Freedom and Responsibility of Science, takes on cases from our members only. The most common types of threats are those concerning threats to scientific freedoms. The freedom to participate in knowledge production, and this requires equitable access to existing knowledge, to information, to data. And the effective exercise of this freedom presumes freedom of movement, association, communication, and expression. So as with journalists, the findings of environmental scientists have long triggered censorship, intimidation, harassment, imprisonment, death, when this research challenges economic interests, political agendas, or other ideologies. While environmental researchers studying climate change, biodiversity, and conservation biology are the most common targets, threats and attacks are widespread in virtually all disciplines examining the human impact on the environment. Now, when I talk about science, I'm including natural and social sciences, medicine, and engineering. So it's not only the natural scientists. So people involved in environmental health, land use, you try and do an environmental protection assessment without significant commercial, industrial, or government interests breathing down your neck. Sustainability science, urban planning, marine sciences, ecotoxicology, etc. Online harassment, abuse, threats, stalking, and smear campaigns are the most common forms of attack, aiming to discredit scientists personally. Remember, our long-term employment does rely on tenure often, so discreditation is serious for everybody. It leads immediately, well, often to self-censorship, which is rife. Online attacks on women scientists have increased significantly since COVID-19. The perpetrators of online violence against women scientists often target their families and by name. The threats are misogynistic and personal and often highly sexualized. Governments, as well as industry lobbyists, may interfere with the functioning of science systems and do by exerting pressure on research-producing institutions, funding bodies, scientific journals, and the media to prevent the funding, the conducting, the publication, and the dissemination of certain areas of scientific research. Industrial lobbyists may conduct misinformation campaigns or cherry-pick scientific data to discredit scientists or create the impression of uncertainty, as we just heard from our colleague from Ireland. Also, governments and industry engage in prolonged legal maneuvering and harassment and interfere with scientists' employment. Alarming new threats include increased opportunities for the surveillance of research, teaching, and discourse. The second most common cases, but quite a lot down, brought to the committee are threats generally internal to science, threats to the responsible conduct of science, which includes actions by individual scientists, scientific organizations, and state actors which compromise the integrity, fairness, trustworthiness, and transparency of our scientific research. Scientists have a responsibility to practice science in ways that meet globally recognized standards and serve the global public good. This doesn't always happen. As with any profession, scientists can get bought. Scientific journals and media outlets and broadcasters can operate in bad faith or with lax controls and publish false and manipulated results and blatant disinformation. Importantly, the beneficial application of new scientific knowledge also depends on responsible scientists. New discoveries like the COVID-19 vaccine will be used by societies in accordance to their own values and power structures. Scientists have a responsibility to think about the uses to which their work might be put and to advise stakeholders of the risks and benefits of these applications, the positives and negatives implications of your research. Trust in science depends on the active dissemination of accurate, peer-reviewed scientific information to peers, the media, policymakers, and civil society. Protection begins with preparation. So as we face the likelihood of increased geostrategic instability, further wars, pandemics, increasing social inequality, extreme weather events due to climate change, we need to think more systematically about the impact of such events on the scientific ecosystem. And the report, the program that we have, Science in Times of Crisis, and the report that we've just published, Protecting Science in Times of Crisis, how do we stop being reactive and become more proactive, addresses this urgent need for a new approach to safeguard scientists and its practitioners during global crises, whatever the crises may be, technological, natural, conflict-driven. Now, we base this report on case studies across different crisis contexts across the world. It brings together insights from science, journalism, development, and the humanitarian sectors, and relevant learning from other domains such as culture, education, and heritage. Very quickly, in terms of what we can do, scientists are excellent at researching what happens out there to others, but we have not reflected on our own vulnerabilities and resilience. The sector needs to take greater responsibility, and the journalism community is years ahead of us in this respect, for prevention and preparedness, for its own internal risk assessment and mitigation, for capacity strengthening where needed, including crisis management, digital security, safety training, and being more aware of our rights and professional practice codes. The Union of Concerned Scientists reports that in many world regions, weak or non-existent laws fail to deter attacks or provide recourse for victims, leaving them vulnerable to reprisals. So I'm not going to repeat, it's been said about strengthening laws and accountability mechanisms. And then very importantly, I want to stress digital security measures. Data is gold in our work nowadays. Creating secure platforms for collecting and sharing data and information is important. Secure, may I say, independent platforms and not only paid-up platforms, is important not only to facilitate critical information exchange during dangerous situations, but also for us to secure research that may become lost during a crisis or become unavailable because of censorship or distorted because of disinformation. In this respect, facilitating open science practices and boosting digital infrastructure is important. And then to finish off, the scientific community is learning from journalists. The new program, the new UNESCO program on the promotion of scientific freedom and the safety of scientists is modeled on UNESCO's work on monitoring and reporting on the safety of scientists, and it's just been launched. It is hoped that this convergence of efforts, civil society, NGOs, the UN, media, and scientific organizations will result in an establishment of a global observatory monitoring threats to the safety of scientists and researchers. Right, I'm finished. I've got more to say, but I'm finished. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Very important. Hope. I think we have still a few minutes for a quick round of questions.
2, 3.
2, 3. So,
Netherlands.
Netherlands, please.
Thank you very much. And we would also like to thank the organizers for bringing us together for this important event today. We've had several very rich discussions, and it was great to hear from journalists, from media workers, from scientists themselves, not just from diplomats. No offense to my colleagues in the room, but it does make for a nice change. We've, of course, heard about the multiple challenges and threats facing journalists today, the rise of SLAPs, disinformation campaigns, etc. And therefore, I would like to take this opportunity to restate the Netherlands' firm commitment to media freedom, as free, pluralistic, and independent media are indispensable for vibrant democracies. We also strongly condemn any forms of intimidation, harassment, persecution, and violence against journalists. In this regard, we also put our money where our mouth is, as we financially support several organizations and projects supporting journalists and media workers around the world through our Power of Voices program. To end, I also had a question to the panel. We heard of initiatives to tackle the issue of SLAPs at the national and regional level. But what role do you see for UN agencies, but also for intergovernmental bodies such as the HRC to have a role in tackling that issue? Thank you.
So thank you very much. Anyone want to react to the question? Please, briefly. Barbara, I see you are ready.
Sure. Well, I think that the international bodies have a key role, can carry a key role in monitoring the development there, in monitoring progress in tackling SLAP, and making sure that any initiative meant to or intended to tackle, to address the threat posed by SLAP is not, first of all, is not used to limit free expression, as we have seen in other cases before, and secondly, it actually does support journalists. So just basically monitoring the implementation and making sure that also there is a communication with the states that are carrying this out, so that there is awareness. Secondly, sorry, I should have made this point before, that any initiative, making sure that any legal reform is carried out also in cooperation with journalist associations, civil society groups, and other expert groups in this. So it's an inclusive process. Thanks.
Thank you. Anything to add, Vivi, Jamil? So I think, because again, I understood we really have to leave on time, we have a rapporteur. The challenge to sum up, it's Marika Palosari. She's an environmental policy expert with 25 years of experience, working on science policy, advocacy nexus on the triple planetary crisis of climate change, biodiversity, and pollution. She has designed and managed several multilateral partnerships in this field, and especially now she is currently program coordinator at the Europe office of the UN Environmental Program Union. Marika, over to you to sum up and wrap up. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. Yeah, an incredibly rich discussion, and I'll do what I can in this short time to try to draw some conclusions and summarize a little bit. I think from this panel, but perhaps from this afternoon as a whole, it's very obvious that it's really imperative to recognize and to highlight the profound interconnection that we have between environmental protection, between democracy, freedom of press, scientific knowledge, and the rule of law. As Jamil put it, safety of journalists is directly linked actually to the destiny of the forests, in this case, in Amazon. But in other words, the safety of journalists and scientists it concerns us all. And I work for the UN Environment Program, but it means that without the safety of these professions, we cannot do our job either. So now, perhaps just to conclude and to bring us to the reality of 2024, where we have more than half of the world's population going to vote this year, I want to take this opportunity, of course, to to highlight in this context also the importance of getting the trustworthy, reliable information to all citizens so that they can really understand who can best govern us in a democracy and beyond what are just the headline terms. As we understood from the discussion and saw from the video, it is not just the traditional reporters, it's also the citizen journalists that need the protection. And on that, Barbara highlighted some of the tools, and clearly we need some more brokers on the UN Plan of Action. From the point of view of my organization, UNEP, I did want to highlight that we do have also guidebooks for best practices on environmental rights. There are some recommendations on how we can educate companies and help to develop further these legal structures that protect environmental rights. We don't have much time now to go into this, but I did want to mention that different kinds of guidance notes exist in support of this work. Among the highlights, I want to mention again some of the opportunities that Barbara mentioned, including the role of the local knowledge, the local journalists and scientists, particularly also in holding accountable the decision makers, the democratic accountability, because as we said, it is really the rule of law that needs to be enforced. And as we have different types of platforms, even AI now producing information, there is no AI that actually will do the job of the whistleblowing. So we still need the journalists and the fact-checking and the recognition of the stories in there that often the investigative journalists do so well. What touched me here, and as there is so much talk about different digital platforms and AI, that it is the empathy and the passion and also the emotion that investigative journalism and the real people behind these stories bring to the picture that often the platforms do not. Collaboration was mentioned also during the previous panel. This is obvious. We all need to work much more together. And finally, what I do want to mention is something, Barbara, that you had mentioned, that environment should be part of all stories, not only because there are not enough environmental journalists and there's not enough financing, but as we can see, whereas sometimes environmental issues have been concerned kind of marginal and less important and less financed, at the end of the day, they are linked to everything that's happening in the society, and that's why they are so controversial, because it is linked to natural resources and finances. So from my perspective as a UNEP staff who tries to support the transition into real situation, all journalists would be environmental journalists and would integrate these issues into their stories about economy and all these other topics that are linked to environment and climate change. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. To wrap up, we heard a lot of concrete suggestions to implement in this panel, but also in the previous one. Let me recall what the President of UNESCO General Conference said, Ambassador Miculescu, that we have to walk the talk. So to walk the talk, I think there is a role that each of us has to play. You mentioned also a new initiative by UNESCO Secretariat in terms of protection of scientists. I hope, of course, there is a role of those in the room. I hope this was informative also for the appointment ahead. You have, I heard from the ambassador earlier that there is the renewal of the resolution on safety of journalists, for instance. Maybe this can be, of course, connected to what we discuss here. But from a UNESCO Secretary point of view, allow me to recall that our Director General in Santiago at the Global Conference of the World Precision Day announced a global roadmap on addressing climate disinformation, which needs, of course, all these elements in a holistic way, in a right-based approach, media information literacy, transparency of digital platform, the work of journalists, the work of scientists, all in safety. And of course, we echoing what UNEP said as UN, when UN will work on that jointly. Thank you to all, and closing this panel, giving the floor to our director for the thanking.
Andrea, as you said, it's for the thanking, because I think all the moderators and the rapporteurs and the panelists, which I also thank for their time and presence, have provided all the details, all the points, highlighted how journalists and scientists live the same reality and the need for them possibly to collaborate and meet in other forums to discuss how they can support each other. After all, they're two different environments, they're two different professions, but I think they're all working for a common goal. And I think that's what UNESCO has highlighted, not only with the freedom of expression and the safety of journalists, but the most recent resolution at the last General Conference that highlighted the safety of journalists, of scientists, as important as those of journalists. And I think the discussions today were a perfect example of that. And I have to say also again that I thank both presidents of the Human Rights Council and of our General Conference to highlight that they're not alone, the scientists and the journalists, that there is also the interest of our governance structure to support and highlight the importance of this. I also would like to conclude by thanking the panelists, because I have to say, from a logistics operation perspective, everyone that we called immediately reacted with a positive response and interest. And that made our job so much easier. Some of you traveled far, some of you traveled less far, but you all were immediately available, interested in the subject, and supporting UNESCO. So UNESCO GLO and UNESCO organization thank our partners, our member states that supported us, and yourselves as panelists to bring your perspectives today. So thank you, and 1800 to the dot. I like to highlight.